a rainy evening, James stumbled upon an old, dimly lit bookstore tucked away in a narrow alley. The store was filled with the scent of aged paper and ink, and peculiar objects lined the shelves. A wooden box caught James's attention, containing a vintage fountain pen with intricate carvings. The shopkeeper warned him, "This pen has a history. Once used, it binds you to its story." Ignoring the warning, James purchased the pen, intrigued by its mysterious aura. As soon as he held it, a strange chill ran down his spine. Back home, he examined it under the light and noticed the initials AL etched into its barrel. James, a budding writer, believed the pen might inspire his next story. But little did he know, this pen had plans of its own. Eager to try the pen, James opened his diary and began writing. The pen glided effortlessly across the paper, but his words seemed to write themselves, forming a story he hadn't imagined. As he wrote, the lights flickered, and the room felt unnaturally cold. He noticed that the ink seemed endless, flowing like blood from an unseen reservoir. His first story, about a haunted mansion, ended in a chilling murder. James felt an odd satisfaction, as if the pen had unlocked something deep within him. When he set the pen down, faint whispers echoed through the room. Nervously laughing it off, he decided it was just his imagination. That night, James woke up to the sound of scratching on the walls. He froze as the pen, lying on the desk, rolled off on its own and fell to the floor. When he picked it up, the ink felt warm, almost alive. Suddenly, the shadows in his room started shifting, forming a human-like figure near the corner. "Who's there?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The shadow dissolved as quickly as it appeared, leaving him in silence. James convinced himself it was a bad dream and tried to sleep. But the pen lay on his nightstand, its eerie carvings glowing faintly in the dark. Over the next few days, James found himself unable to stop writing. Every time he picked up the pen, vivid stories poured out effortlessly. Each tale was darker than the last, filled with horrifying details and gruesome deaths. Strangely, James didn't recall crafting the plots or characters. When he reread his stories, he realized they mirrored actual events that had happened in the past. News articles and reports confirmed chilling similarities. Frightened but fascinated, he rationalized it as coincidence. Yet, deep down, he knew the pen was connected. One afternoon, a stranger knocked on James's door. He introduced himself as Vikram, a historian researching cursed artifacts. "That pen you have, it belonged to a man named Arjun Lal who disappeared after using it," Vikram explained. James was skeptical but invited him inside. Vikram showed James a faded photograph of Arjun holding the same pen. "Everyone who uses it vanishes mysteriously," Vikram warned, his voice grave. James laughed nervously, brushing it off as a hoax. But after Vikram left, unease settled over him. That night, James was jolted awake by a vivid nightmare. He saw himself standing in a dense forest, surrounded by whispering voices and glowing eyes. A disembodied voice hissed, "Finish the story, or you'll become part of it." Startled, he woke up drenched in sweat, the pen glowing brightly on his desk. Unable to sleep, he sat down and began writing, compelled by an unseen force. The words flowed faster than ever, and with each sentence, he felt a growing sense of dread. He tried to stop, but his hand wouldn't obey. The next morning, James noticed his fingers stained with dark ink that wouldn't wash off. He tried to ignore it, but soon discovered the ink stains spreading, forming patterns resembling scars. Panicking, He threw the pen into a drawer and locked it away. Yet, faint scratching noises began emanating from the drawer, growing louder at night. It felt as though the pen was calling to him. The more he resisted, the more insistent the sounds became, driving him to the brink of madness. Desperate, James decided to discard the pen. He threw it into a river far from home, watching as it sank into the depths. Relieved, he returned home only to find the pen waiting for him on his desk. Fear consumed him as he realized he couldn't escape its grip. A note lay beside the pen. "Your story isn't finished." The handwriting wasn't his, yet it felt disturbingly familiar. James knew he had no choice but to continue writing. James noticed the shadows in his home growing darker and more pronounced. At night, they moved on their own, creeping closer to him as he wrote. He tried turning on every light in the house, but the darkness seemed impervious. Each shadow whispered tales of despair, urging him to write faster. James began seeing faces in the darkness, gaunt, hollow-eyed specters staring at him. He felt like a prisoner, chained to the pen and its endless demands. One evening, James felt his hand move involuntarily as he held the pen. It wasn't him writing anymore. An unseen force had taken control. The story unfolding on the page was about a young writer, haunted by his own creation. James's reflection in the mirror twisted, showing a hollow, spectral version of himself. "You're next," the reflection whispered with a sinister grin. He dropped the pen, but it floated back into his hand, refusing to let go. James's house became a living nightmare. Doors slammed shut on their own, and his belongings rearranged themselves into cryptic patterns. At night he heard whispers, now louder and more distinct. "Write, finish, obey." His reflection no longer mimicked his movements. It stared back at him with hollow, accusing eyes. Exhausted and terrified, James decided to research the pen's origins. As he combed through old documents online, he stumbled upon Arjun Lal's diary, which eerily mirrored his own experiences. The last entry read, "The pen demands a soul." James discovered that the pen was cursed by Arjun Lal, a writer who used it to channel spirits for inspiration. The pen absorbed the essence of its users, trapping them in the stories they wrote. James's mind raced as he realized the stories he'd been writing were not fiction, but echoes of the pen's victims. He felt a sudden surge of cold air and turned to see the faint outline of Arjun Lal standing behind him. "Finish my story," the ghostly figure whispered before vanishing into thin air. James's heart pounded as he realized the only way to survive was to uncover the story's end. Determined to break free, James attempted to bargain with the pen. "What do you want from me?" he shouted into the empty room. The pen moved on its own, scrawling on a blank page, "Your life for the story." James's blood ran cold as he realized the pen sought his very soul. Desperate, he promised to finish the story if it let him live. The pen's glow dimmed, as though it accepted the deal. With trembling hands, he prepared to write, knowing this might be his final act. As James wrote, the boundaries between reality and fiction began to blur. The room around him morphed into the eerie settings of his stories. A haunted mansion, a dark forest, and blood-soaked streets. Ghostly figures from his tales appeared, circling him, their hollow eyes filled with malice. James realized the pen wasn't just a tool, it was a portal to another realm. Each word he wrote seemed to pull him deeper into its world. His vision blurred, and he felt himself being consumed by the very story he was creating. James found himself seated in a grand, decrepit hall, surrounded by shadowy figures watching him intently. They clapped silently as he wrote, their hollow eyes glinting with anticipation. The pen's glow intensified, and the ink now resembled thick black blood. James realized these were the trapped souls of previous writers, doomed to witness his fate. "Finish it," they chanted in unison, their voices echoing in his mind. He wrote feverishly, hoping to escape before it was too late. The story was nearing its climax, but his strength was fading. The story took an unexpected turn, writing itself as James's life story. Every event, from his childhood to the moment he bought the pen, appeared on the pages. The final lines described his own death at the hands of a mysterious shadow. "No," James screamed, trying to stop, but the pen burned his fingers, forcing him to continue. As he wrote the last word, the shadow appeared behind him, its form massive and menacing. "Your time is up," it hissed. James felt an icy grip on his shoulder, pulling him into darkness. The next morning, James's house was eerily silent. His chair was empty, the diary on the desk open to the last page. The final words read, "And he was never seen again." James's belongings were untouched, but he was nowhere to be found. Neighbors reported seeing strange lights and hearing whispers from his house the night before. The pen lay quietly on the desk, its glow now completely extinguished. It seemed to wait for its next victim. Weeks later, a curious neighbor named Kabir entered James's empty house, drawn by rumors of his disappearance. Among the clutter, he found the pen resting innocently on the desk. Kabir, an aspiring writer himself, felt an irresistible pull toward it. As soon as he held it, a faint glow returned, and whispers filled the air. Ignoring the unease, Kabir pocketed the pen, excited to try it out. Outside, the shadows around the house seemed to shift, as though watching him leave. Kabir began writing with the pen, amazed at how easily the words flowed. His first story mirrored James's disappearance, but he dismissed it as coincidence. The shadows in his home grew darker, just as they had for James. Kabir felt the same chilling whispers and unexplainable events. The pen had found its new host, and the cycle of horror began anew. Kabir's friends noticed his growing obsession but couldn't save him from the pen's grasp. Years later, James's story became an urban legend, told among writers as a cautionary tale. The cursed pen was said to resurface every few years, claiming another victim. Some claim to have seen it in old bookstores or antique shops, always accompanied by an ominous warning. Despite the stories, ambitious writers continued to seek it. Drawn by the promise of unparalleled creativity, the pen waited patiently, knowing its legend would keep it alive. Somewhere in a dimly lit room, it glowed faintly, eager for its next victim. Thanks for watching, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe our channel for more new videos.